So what does the blockchain, the relationships that you're having, and that creative project that you're working on all have in common? They all go through a certain process of creation, and we tend to get stuck at certain parts because we are not aware of the underlying mechanism that is happening in our minds. In this video, I'm going to introduce a graph to you and 5 different steps that you can take along the way so that your creative process will be more smooth and you can actually enjoy the whole process. Before I show this graph, I first want to introduce you to 2 concepts, or actually 2 Greek gods. So the first god is Dionysus. He is the god of wine and ecstasy, and he's often associated with emotions, orgies, irrational thinking, the senses, chaos, instinct. And the other god is Apollo, which the Greeks see sometimes as his opposite. And Apollo is the god of divine distance and also associated with rational thinking, order, purity, and restraint. The Greeks believed that the interplay between these 2 gods actually created beauty and art, because they were both also associated with art. So I want to introduce this graph to you. It's known as the Dunning-Kruger curve or the hype cycle, and it's something that I've noticed as a designer I'm going through during each project. So now I will first explain the different phases of this graph and then what you can actually do to smoothly go through this process. So the first phase is actually the seed, the starting of the idea. So this is just something that resonates with you. You hear about something, you get a new idea and you get excited. And the next thing you know, the thoughts are gonna race through your head and you're moving up this peak, but you don't know any limitations yet. We could say that the higher you go, the more you're in touch with Dionysus, the god of chaos and ecstasy. And this is a phase where you're wishful thinking, so all the options are still open. The example here could be that blockchain was invented, people were really hyped about it, that's also why it's called the hype cycle. But when they actually start to try to implement it, they walk against all these walls and they start to realize that it's actually not that easy to work with the technology. The next part of the process is you're actually going down into the valley of disillusionment, where you start to realize that all these beautiful ideas that you had, all these inspirations and ideas, you can not use all of them. And you might feel like the project that you're working on will never be completed. One of my teachers used to say when I was studying design that there will always be a part in the process where you really start to look forward to the next project. And that is in this valley of disillusionment, where you start to realize how much work it will take to actually realize your ideas into the real world. So we could say that all the way at the bottom, the more you go down, the more you're in touch with Apollo, the god of restraints, of order and divine distance. The next part of this graph is called the slope of enlightenment, where you're starting to learn actually what you can use about your idea, and slowly you will be reaching the plateau of productivity where you're not too chaotic and in ecstasy, but you're also not too constrained and too ordered, but just right in the middle, where the Greeks talked about where art is created and where beauty comes into existence. Now I will introduce 5 steps that you're gonna see yourself moving towards on this graph, so that you can become aware of this and actually go with the flow again, instead of moving against it. The first phase, as I said, is moving from the seed to the peak. And let's take as an example that you're trying to write a blog. What you want to do at this point is actually to get a notebook or any other medium to catch all your ideas in, so write them all down. And eventually you will get at a point where your head is full, your notebook is full, and you're on this peak of inflated expectations. So the world is still totally beautiful. you're there together with Dionysus, the god of the chaos and the ecstasy and the wine and the orgies and the parties, and everything is beautiful, there's no boundaries. And when you finally reach the peak, you want to be looking for the restrictions, the restraints. So Apollo is also the god associated with restraints, and you're looking down into this valley of disillusionment. And in order for you to move down, what you want to do is to imagine and start with the end in mind. So try to make a minimum viable product. So some small thing that might already have the functions of what you're trying to create. So in the example of making a blog, you want to think about how big you want this, how many pages you want this blog to be, and really get a clear goal of what are the boundaries of the end result. And then try to work towards a smaller version of this, because this is the point where you're going to run into a ceiling, and that's totally okay because your mind is still in chaos mode. And what you want to do at this point in order to glide down into this valley of disillusionment, it might be counterintuitive, but it's part of the process and you have to learn to love it. So part 3 is to just let go. You should know that at this point of the process, it's actually normal to feel despair, and you shouldn't fight it because it's just a way to move forward. So at this point, you want to take a step back and let your mind just take care of all the things, all the chaos. You want to let the snow globe settle all his little snowflakes so that you can actually start to clearly see all the things that are important. But don't force anything, just like take a walk, go meditate. Just don't watch television at this phase because it will actually inhibit your mind from wandering, and we want your mind to be wandering because that's when all the snowflakes are going to fall down and settle. So in the case of a blog, this is the point where you just want to close down your laptop, take a walk, get some tea, just get your mind off it. At this point, you're going to end up at the 4th phase in this valley of despair. And what you should do at this point is to kill your darlings, close all your tabs, start with one new empty sheet of paper, start from 0. So in the case of a blog, you want to just open one empty page. So after you started from 0, you started with a clean slate, you killed your darlings, you're going to move up the slope of enlightenment towards the plateau of productivity. So what you want to do to move up this slope of enlightenment is to remind yourself to keep things really simple, to just add the few things that are the most important for this specific creative project. Just keep in mind that less is more and that you have to keep it simple. So in the case of writing a blog, this would mean that you would just start to write a little part of the beginning, a little part of the end, a little part of the middle, and then just fill it up slowly. Because all the stuff in your mind has settled and you now slowly find places to put them. So now you are actually aware of all these stages and you've reached the plateau of productivity. You should be able to recognize whether you are in a state of chaos and ecstasy or you're somewhere in the state of restraint and order. And instead of trying to brute force yourself from this peak of inflated expectations directly towards the plateau of productivity, you now know that it's actually not a problem to just feel a little bit of despair, because that's all part of the process of settling your mind. So after this video, you will actually start to recognize the hype cycle in your life. Whether it's at a personal level, it's just your creative project, or it's a society at large when we're thinking about new technologies and people are really hyped and they have really high expectations and they still have to find out whether or not they can actually put them to use. But it could also be a different time scale. So whether you're going to a movie and you're going through the hype cycle, or it's maybe even life at large, where you're also going through a whole hype cycle and eventually getting to this plateau of productivity in between the chaos, ecstasy, and restraints and order. I hope that by now you will have learned where in this hype cycle you are for different projects in your life, when you need to take a step back or when you just need to fully let yourself go to fall in love with the idea. When your mind is completely full, you just want to find these restraints and try to make something until you run into a wall at the peak of inflated expectations, and just take a step back, let the dust settle, go for a walk, get your mind off the project, do something else. And don't fight it when you end up in this valley of disillusionment, because it's also part of the process. And when you know that you've arrived in this valley of disillusionment, it's time to kill your darlings, to start with a new empty canvas and slowly add the things that are essential to your creation so that you can reach this plateau of productivity, so you can get a good result. If you think this video was helpful, you can leave a like or subscribe, because there will be more videos. And until then.